Good day and welcome to week 4 of ACA. Now we have had 3 weeks, and each week there's been a discussion, and I've been after about a third of the class to really try to get something in on Monday and Tuesday so that your fellows can respond to that. Now if you hang out till I'll just do all of them Sunday evening, well then no one's been able to respond to yours. So if you're in a group of 4 or a group of 3 even, and they have no one to do any back and forth with, it really isn't fair to them. Now, the discussions what I'm trying to do is create some sense of community. Most of you are still at the very beginning of your college career, and as such, it's important that you make acquaintances. You bump into other people who may be studying what you're studying. Now, the logic behind this isn't that we're children. Rather, it is just the opposite of that. It is that if you're in any business environment and also in any higher ed environment, you are not by yourself. You are in a community, and this is a community college for a reason. They named it that. So, for the discussions, they're very important to me, and I've been as clear as I can about that. With that said, this week it's a different kind of discussion. I'm not going to have you in tiny little groups. Instead, I've got a prompt in there. You're going to go in and you're going to reply to my prompt ideally today, Monday or Tuesday, and then you can come back and then respond to people who look like maybe they're studying what you're studying, maybe they're involved in what you're involved in, or maybe it's someone who they've said something interesting, or when you look at the responses, you can see some persons haven't had anyone respond to them. So, I'm going to ask you to respond to 3 or 4 people this week, just in 2 or 3 sentences per response. I don't want it a single sentence or something like, cool, dude. So that's the discussion part of this. The second thing I'm going to talk about, last week I gave you a conception of system of knowing. System of knowing. And what I was talking about here is basically, we all had a K-12. Every single person that's in this class has had a K-12 experience. And theoretically, that's where you picked up your study skills. For some people, you went to schools that were terrific and they really helped you with study skills and you learned how to do that. And maybe your family also, has a background where they're very academic. So it was easy for you to sort of think, oh, well, my system of knowing is how I study. Okay, well, how do you study? Well, as I said last week, reading isn't studying. Reading is just your first introduction to something. Now, if you read, Goldilocks, well, sure, there's nothing to that but this simple little story. Most textbooks, however, had a lot of data built into them in a structured fashion, and they're asking you to go through the textbook and then memorize, understand, get familiar with a field. Okay, so your system of knowing is how do you study? You know that for you, the best thing that you do, you go through and you underline the important stuff, okay? And then you come back and you can glance at that and it'll remind you. And then if you go over it several times and maybe consistently during the week you're going over that, then if this is a class that has exams, then you're prepared for that exam because you have a system of putting that in your head. And it's not just facts. It's not just introductory material. Sometimes it'll be a little more complex. And that's going to bring me to the next point I'm going to make, and that is we go from a system of knowing to something a little bit more fundamental to true understanding. Now, and I'm going to ask you to explain, to agree or disagree with this after I put it up here, so just stay with me. What I'm saying is there's a system of knowing. That's how you tend to study, how you put things in your head, and you have a technique for doing that works for you. Then you're figuring out the entry level of college. Now, what I'm talking about is if you are just learning something, you're a novice. Now, that's nothing wrong with being a novice. We're all a novice. If I were to try to put in a carburetor, for instance, I don't think I'd do it correctly because I could watch the YouTube on it and I could watch someone do a carburetor, but I don't have any knowledge of auto mechanics. So I'm a novice in auto mechanics, and I would really need to have somebody sort of hold my hand, so to speak, as I walk through that. Now, if I'm a novice, say I'm going into cosmetology, so I want to basically. And I don't even know all the language in cosmetology now. My mother was a hairdresser. And then say if I wanted to study that so I could dye hair, I could dress hair, I could cut hair, I could make, what other variations on theme, I can't even discuss that because I'm a novice. But if I'm here to study that, the first thing I need to do is get some basic facts, some basic information. After that, then on this is a continuum. I go from here, at the very end of it, when I'm ready to teach this stuff, I'm an expert. Okay, so I have, that's an E. So what happens, you go from novice to expert. In this class, there's an assumption that most of you are novice learners. Some of you may not be. If you're here to study welding and you have been raised in a family where there was a whole lot of that kind of commerce, and maybe you have worked with a parent, a mother or a father who had welding in their shop or their garage, and you're familiar with that, well, then you're coming in a little further up in the spectrum here. That's great. Now, I'm going to ask you to just tell me real quickly. I'm going to pause the video here, and then I'm just going to give you a chance to say, do you agree with that? That it goes from novice to expert, and that you may very well be a novice right now. Okay, so that's set up. Now, what I'm going to say is that what happens as you study a given field, what's going to happen is you're going to have, you're going to get more and more expertise as you go. You're going to get better and better at it. And you're going to have not only knowledge, but you're going to have some understanding. Here's what I mean. You have this foundation. This foundation is what you were given in K-12. What you picked up along the way. Maybe you're out of the military and you've been out of school for like a decade, and you have a really great foundation because the military taught you some fundamentals about how to be dependable, how basically be committed to something, how to basically have some personal discipline. So that's their foundation, okay? But on top of that, if I'm making a building, I've got this foundation. This is K-12. I've got this structure that I'm going to create, and then what I'm going to do in this structure is I'm going to put up walls. I'm going to put in the electric. I've got to do all that. But the first thing I have to have is this structure where I'm going to be able to put that in. That is the framework. So what I'm going to introduce is the concept called a framework of understanding. What does this mean? Well, it means if you're putting in a carburetor, you have a whole lot of knowledge about an engine because you have a framework for understanding what a carburetor is. If you're in cosmetology, they'll teach you a whole bunch of stuff that's really, really basic information about hair dye and tools of the trade and whatnot. And those are really important. If you're in cosmetology, if you're studying English and say, oh, I'm not doing that, I'm going to go into a 4-year college. Well, you'll need to probably have a sense of what you want to do when you get there while you're here. And that framework for English is, well, you've got to be able to not only just have ideas and know how to write sentences and know how to write words, but you also have to have some idea moreover about how to write a paper in its entirety. How do you come up with your initial claim? And then after that claim, you're going to have some support for that claim. You're going to say, this is why I think it. And then you're going to come up with a conclusion, and that is, this is my conclusion. And my conclusion is claim, support my claim, and then restate my claim. That's a lot of writing, but that's the structure of English. Now, if you're doing history, same thing. There's a framework for understanding history, and it's a vast amount of knowledge, but how you understand how different parts of history impact our understanding now. So, all that to say, I'm introducing another term, and it is framework for understanding and a system of knowing. And the framework for understanding is what you're going to be building. And I'll just wrap up with my understanding of how college works. In college, generally speaking, you have an undergraduate degree that you can get, okay? Or you can even start with like an AA, which is an Associate of Arts, which means you've been here for probably a couple of years, and you have some general understanding of a field. That's what an AA is. An AA is an introductory degree. After that, then we also have Often it's a Bachelor of Sciences. That's an undergraduate degree. It means you have graduated from a 4-year college very often. And then after that, if you want to work in your master's means you are dedicating yourself to one part of a classification of understanding. So your master's degree isn't that you're just studying English, but you are studying maybe medieval English, and you're dedicated to one thing. And so you become really an expert in one field. And you can do that, arguably, or traditionally, we're saying that takes about 6 years. So this takes 2 years, this takes 2 years, this often takes 2 years, and then maybe another 4 if you want to get a doctorate. Now, doctorate, and if you're not familiar with academics in this regard, not a big deal. I wasn't either. But a doctorate means you're not only an expert in the field, but you're adding to the field. You are so much of an expert that you are adding knowledge to that field. And what your thesis is when you're doing a doctorate is to say, hey, not only have I studied this, I'm an expert in it, but here's something you don't know that I personally am adding to the field. Now, that's all the information I'll give you today, but it's a concept of going from novice to expert. In this class, there's an assumption that there's some stuff you need to learn to be able to go on into these different areas, and our job is to help you be prepared to do that while you're at college here. So, with that said, make sure you go through this week's chapter. You can find it's fairly light, but there's a lot of little things you have to do. And have a great week, and don't hesitate to reach out to me, okay? You've got my contact information. Send me an email, not the messages thing so much. Anyways, I appreciate you giving me some time, and make sure at the end of this you hit the submit assignment or submit grade, which will pop up at the end. Have a nice day.